On today's show, a less than ideal injury update for a Hawks draft pick, plus the latest news, your mailbag questions, and more. And all of that is on the way.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1771 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday afternoon here in late July. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always would, to make us your first listen each and every day. Please go ahead and subscribe to Locked On Hawks anywhere you might find podcasts. That includes Apple, that includes Spotify, Overcast, etc. Plus, if you are watching on YouTube right now, go ahead and like this episode, and please subscribe on that video platform as well. Enable notifications so that you know when there's an episode dropping, and please tell your friends about the podcast. As I said earlier this week, Summer League is now over, and the real depth of the offseason is actually here. Nothing really happens as far as a game perspective for about 2 months for the Hawks going into training camp, etc. I did a show earlier this week laying out 7 kind of broad storylines for the next couple of months. One of those includes Bruno Fernando and his deadline coming up. It's 1 week from basically today, as you're listening to this podcast, until his new deadline is on his guarantee date. So keep an eye on that. That could be a pivot point for the rest of the roster. And I talked about all that stuff and more on that show earlier this week, plus all the coverage that you wanted from Las Vegas, covering all of Summer League. So if you missed any of that, I can catch up right now and give you the context on all of that stuff. On today's show, we'll be diving into the news and kind of the latest buzz and an injury update, etc. And then at the end of the podcast, some mailbag adjacent questions as we kind of get through this midweek episode. So the first thing actually broke earlier today on Wednesday that we'll talk about, and that is the update on Nikola Đurišić. So he's the second round pick for the Hawks. The Hawks they traded AJ Griffin to get the 44th pick, and then went up a spot to get Đurišić, who they targeted the entire way in the draft. But 10 days ago, as I record this podcast on Wednesday, he broke his foot, fractured his left foot in a Summer League game, the second Summer League game of that run in Las Vegas. The Hawks did not indicate what the break/fracture actually was, but now we know that it was the 5th metatarsal in his left foot that he broke, and he actually already had surgery on Monday. A special surgeon in Charlotte did the procedure. Officially, the Hawks said on Wednesday that the next update on Đurišić is not going to be until November. And that is, you're not mishearing that. November was what the Hawks outlined in their official injury update/release. That is 4 months from now. Obviously, it could be 3.5 or so, but still, it's still July right now. November's a long time from now, and that is crucially well after opening night and well after training camp and all of that stuff. So just based on that, and look, it doesn't say that he's going to be out that long. The official injury wording is that, quote, an update on his status will be provided in November. But still, usually teams don't do that stuff on accident and kind of just pushes things off. But guys don't often come back before that actual timeline arrives. For reference on the injury itself, Zion Williamson was a popular player that had this injury a few years ago, a broken 5th metatarsal. Kevin Durant before that had the same injury. Of course, Jeff Stotts, who's an injury expert, probably the leading injury expert on this kind of stuff, who runs the In Street Clothes blog, wrote at the time of Zion's injury a couple years ago that the average lost time when this injury happens to happen during a season is 10 or 11 weeks, like 42 games, basically. That's a half season during the season that a guy would, on average, miss. Again, that's the average. So some of those are longer, some of those are shorter, but he also wrote this, quote, the nature and location of the break and the 5th metatarsal fracture is key to recovery. So what we don't know is how it broke. I'm not a doctor, of course, but the Hawks didn't provide that, just said what the injury actually is. And, the projections on missed time are considerably less when the injury happens in the offseason, because sometimes those happen like early in the offseason, but this one happened in mid-July. So it wasn't like he got injured in April and May and had the whole summer to recover. Yes, there's more summer to come, but the fact the Hawks said November, notable there. So we don't know exactly the timeline. That's the Hawks often take great pains to not provide injury timelines as far as like return to play. But because it's the offseason, they don't even really have to give you a return to like ramp up kind of thing. It was a very general November pushback. Now, there's one thing else here that's very important to keep in mind with Đurišić, is that he is not under contract. And I'm repeating myself a little bit here for previous episodes, but it's worth noting that he was drafted in the second round. There is nothing guaranteed for a second round draft pick. First round picks are locked into the rookie scale. They get 2 guaranteed years pretty much right away. Second rounders can agree to long-term contracts. We saw that with Mo Gay. Last year, the Hawks gave him a multi-year deal, but they could also be two ways. Seth Lundy signed a two-way last year with the Hawks on a second round contract, similar to the same spot in the draft that Jurisch was drafted in. So there's a wide range there, and it's a little bit strange because he's not under contract right now. Somebody asked me today, like, for instance, are the Hawks going to be providing his medical care? From what I understand, yes, the Hawks are absolutely going to be taking pains to make sure he is taken care of. He's not signed, but he is their draft pick, and they're not going to cheap out and push this off to somebody else. But again, there are kind of different paths here that can kind of go down here. He could either end up on a two-way contract, a full contract, or he could be a draft and stash, which basically means that because he was coming from overseas, he could stay overseas, play somewhere else, and have the Hawks have his rights. They would retain his rights, but he would not come over right away. So what we don't know right now is what's going to happen. I saw some people assuming today that he'll definitely be stashed now or whatever. That's possible, and I would certainly argue that it's probably more likely that he would be stashed than it was pre-injury. But because, and I've said this before too, but he was not going to be projected to contribute to the team this year anyway. I would have thought he'd be in College Park a lot, even if he's on a real contract. There's no reason why he couldn't still sign a multi-year deal, but there is the roster crunch that we talked about a lot on the most recent show that I recorded on Monday into Tuesday. But the Hawks have too many guys already before you even factor Đurišić in. So I think it's not impossible that they could clear the roster spots out in some form via trade, but right now they can't really sign him functionally to a multi-year deal until they do something else with their roster. There's a two-way slot open. There were only two guys on two ways, and now there are 3 open two-way slots. So right now Seth Lundy's on one of them, and also Keaton Wallace is on one of them, but that could be a spot for Đurišić, or again, he could be stashed. We just don't know. But I was expecting an update of some kind after the injury happened. I thought it was probably going to be a surgical thing because when you break a bone in your foot, as the Hawks, fractured foot is what they said. In the meantime, I expected them to kind of give an update, and that happened again on Wednesday. It's just kind of an ominous one. And I said at the time, like, he's going to be out for a while. As soon as we knew it was a fractured foot, the for a while was very general on purpose. But even I was not projecting necessarily him to be out until November. And one more time, not definitively, but based on that, I would certainly have to assume or estimate or project that he won't be around for training camp and won't be around in October. And it's a long time from now. So hopefully it gets better soon. The Hawks do like him quite a bit. Second round picks, of course, it's not like you have the same projection that you would for Ricochet or somebody that you're drafting in the first round, but the Hawks did have a first round level grade on Đurišić, as did some other people in the league. And he was okay-ish in his game plus at Summer League, but moreover, it's a long-term thing. Anyone you're drafting, even in the first round, I would say this about, but especially in the second round, you're trying to get some long-term value versus short-term value. So this is going to put him even further behind for this year. So even if he's on a regular contract or a two-way, he probably won't help you a lot, but that was always going to be the case anyway. And I will stop rambling now on this, but that was kind of the big news of the day on Wednesday. All right, we'll have some more news-y, kind of buzzy kind of stuff that's been out there in the last week or two, and then a mailbag question perhaps at the end of the podcast. But first, a word from our partners on today's show. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime, and Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. They help you to get the most fantastic baseball tickets, basketball tickets, etc. They help you do it faster and easier with last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and the lowest possible price guarantee. That makes Gametime a fantastic option that makes things easy for you across the board. I've been using the Gametime app for a long, long time now. It's come in handy for me when talking about Braves tickets, Falcons tickets, United tickets, as well as shows and concerts throughout the city of Atlanta and beyond. At Gametime, you can save big when buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They also have flash deals, actually save big money and even save even more when choosing a section and then letting Gametime choose the seats for you within that section. They also have an awesome feature when it comes to toggling to show the total up front with no surprise fees when you get to the checkout screen at the end. That's an awesome one for me. Also, you can get a panoramic view of the seats that you're looking for in the app before you buy them, and you are also getting the lowest possible price with the folks at Gametime. Take all of the guesswork out of buying tickets with the folks at the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account with Gametime and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, beyond the Đurišić injury news, some other stuff to kind of round up in the last week or two that's kind of been out there in the ether. Some people asked about the Olympics when I talked about those on Monday into Tuesday, when Dice Daniels and Bogey were going to be playing. And I won't get the entire schedule here, but Australia and Daniels open up the Olympic play on Saturday against Spain. And Dyson's been getting rave reviews, truly rave reviews in Australia and throughout the process in the lead up to the Olympics. Defensive stopper for them, etc. And I'm looking forward to seeing him play at a big stage like this. And then Serbia with Bogi and Nikola Jokic, of course, will be opening on Sunday against the U.S., actually, in a game that I'm sure people will be watching closely. It's still group play. It's not make or break time just yet in the Olympics. But certainly Bogi against the U.S. will be getting a lot of eyeballs in Atlanta, I am sure. From there, some reporting recently from Mark Stein, noting the usual stuff I would say about the Hawks having Capela on the market, which I've talked about a million times at this point in time. Nothing new there, just that Capela is clearly available in trade, and the Hawks haven't been able to kind of giving him away for nothing at this point in time. Like, they're not willing to do that, at least they haven't been to this point. This is now me talking, but the Hawks are also quite mindful of the luxury tax line this year and also of their future books when it comes to Jalen Johnson being paid next year, which we'll talk about later on in this mailbag. So that's a consideration too. They won't take on money, I wouldn't guess, for Capela. So challenging stuff there. Stein also wrote that Larry Nance Jr. is, quote, being chased by multiple teams in need of proven size, end quote. I think I mentioned this earlier on the show this week, but it won't be super difficult to move Nance if they want to do that. He's a rotation player, a rotation level player, I should say, like not necessarily a starter right now, but someone who's like very valuable. Also with an expiring contract, $11.2 million for this season. He can play the 5. He can play the 4 a little bit. He's a decent enough shooter to fit kind of most places, I would say. He's very well regarded as a character guy in the locker room. And monetarily, he fits into the MLE if the Hawks wanted to send him to a team that wanted to take him into that. So if a team had that open, take him in, no matching salary, etc. At the same time, I haven't heard anything that I would describe as like imminent for Larry Nance right now. I think the Hawks are prepared to keep him if that's the best option at this point in time. He would certainly help them from a depth perspective. And there's always stuff like this, like a guy gets traded to a team in July where it's not like he's had time to show up in Atlanta and practice, et cetera, and be integrated in the organization. So he's in limbo. It would not shock me if he's traded. It would shock me if he's not traded, et cetera. I will say people in the league are still kind of projecting the Hawks to move either Nance or Capela at some point between now and season starting. Not that it's a definite, but like still like kind of not necessarily assuming, but thinking that probably will happen. We'll see. Because right now, they are under the tax as is. Once they move on from probably Bruno or something like that to get under the tax or start to get under the roster line, that's a big factor here. But the phones are definitely ringing on Nance and on Capela. And I think Nance is easier to trade than Capela just because of the salary and all that stuff. But both guys are expiring contracts, which certainly is notable, makes things easier in a lot of different ways. Speaking of Capela, Ian Begley, formerly of ESPN, I believe now at SNY, mentioned the Knicks calling on Capela at some point over the summer so far. Not imminent like that, just be clear. But the Knicks need center help. So they lost Isaiah Hartenstein. They did a lot of different things this summer. They, of course, they sort of kept OG Anunoby and also traded the world for Mikal Bridges. They do have a starting caliber center in Mitchell Robinson, but there's like nothing behind him basically on their roster. And Robinson's not been very durable to this point. Plus, Capela would fit what Tibbs wants in New York very, very well, let's just say. He likes bigs who are defensive-minded. Check that box. Rebounders, check that box. And that they don't need the ball on offense, check that box. Obviously, that's Clint to a T. Now, the tricky thing there is with the Knicks is that they don't really have matching salary to make an obvious offer to Atlanta. They have 7 guys on their team that are making 8 figures, so $10 million or more. 5 of them are just not going to get traded for Capela. 4 of them are Villanova guys who are not going to get traded right now. They're all in on that mindset, it seems. And the 5th guy is OG Anunoby, who just signed the max for them, isn't going to trade, obviously. Then you have Julius Randle, who's making more than Capela and wouldn't be a trade candidate in a deal for Clint, I don't think. Just to say that, just a common sense wise. And the 7th guy is Robinson. And the Hawks may not love him the Knicks may not love him as their starting center, but the whole point for the Knicks would be to add Capela to Robinson, not to replace Robinson with Capela. So all that said, the obvious trade isn't really there. Now, if you go on further, they could include Miles McBride, who's making like $5 million or so, but there isn't like a supernatural way to match salary beyond that. This has been a topic for a while. Like out in Vegas, this came up a few times with people that cover the Knicks or cover the Hawks or cover other teams, and they're asking me about it. The best idea that I heard, and it wasn't mine to be fair, that could happen here maybe would be like a weird sign-in trade with Precious Achiuwa. I wouldn't describe that as likely to happen, but the Hawks just kind of did this once with Cody Zeller in the Murray trade, where you would pretty much give Achua like a balloon payment, just enough money to match salary in a Capela deal, and make it a 3-year deal because it has to be in a sign and trade, but then it would make it super non-guaranteed. And then you'd want an asset from the Knicks to do that. Because Precious Achua is not a useless player. He's fine, but he's not as good as Capela by any means. And obviously, like, isn't a huge plus on a contract that's big enough to make the deal done. So that could be like maybe you do McBride and Achua on a sign and trade and like another asset, something like that for Capela. Maybe you just give Achua a big balloon payment for the first year and then take a first round pick along with him. I don't know. That's obviously grasping at straws in some ways. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if you are trying to find a 2-team deal between the Hawks and the Knicks, it kind of has to involve Precious Achua in some fashion. I don't know if the Hawks would like him or not. I'm not reporting that. It's just kind of just doing the natural math, common sense stuff on that front. And again, maybe there's a weird 3-team deal or something like that that's out there. But there was I'm not even going to use the word report. There was like a fake Instagram rumor or something like that about the Hawks buying Capela out. And it was a Knicks focused account trying to do this. It made the rounds a little bit. This could change, I will say, but I've never heard a single thing about the Hawks buying out Capela. They shouldn't do that. The Hawks are not like if the Hawks were like from the rebuilding right now, I might understand that a little bit more. But the Hawks are still trying to win on some level this year. Not going to be a title contender. I understand that, but they're not trying to bottom out either without their own pick. So Capela helps them no matter what people think about him. He helps them right now. He's a useful player, and there's no reason to buy him out at this stage. So just getting out in front of that right now, I'd be shocked about that. I think he's either going to be on the team in the rotation and playing every game, or he'll be traded. Anything else in between that, I'd be kind of surprised by. Like, there's also scenarios people asking about this. We'll kind of get into this more in a second with the mailbag question about like, will the Hawks just bench Capela and play Okongwu and Nance? I'd be surprised by that. I think Capela is too good to not play at all in an NBA game right now. So there you go. I'll have a mailbag question actually on this topic in a second when it comes to wrapping up the Clint Capela thing as well as the in-season tournament before we get out of here at the end of the podcast. But first, a word from our partners on today's show. All right, and a topical mailbag question dating back to what I was talking about with Clint Capela comes from Zach with a K, who says, if the Hawks do not or cannot move Clint Capela, do you think he's going to expire into free agency at the end of the contract and come off the books, or is there an appetite on either side to extend him at backup money like 2 years and a $12 million AAV? Question mark. Good question here from Zach. I'm answering this one because of the obvious tie-in with the Knicks thing, Capela. There are 4 options as Zach kind of lays out there. You can either trade him this summer or in season. So between now and February, basically, you could trade him. Option number 2 is that he just expires and leaves in free agency. Option 3 is that maybe he expires and then re-signs at a cheaper number. And then 4 is the extension option, which he mentions. To be clear, Capela is extension eligible right now. The Hawks could sign him to extension right now today if they wanted to. And 3 years ago, they signed to an extension that is now finishing up at the end of the season. For what it's worth, I haven't heard anything about active negotiations on an extension, but that doesn't mean they're not happening or that they can't happen. Just haven't heard that necessarily. I can almost hear Hawks fans yelling at me right now at the thought of extending Capela. I get it. He's not the same guy he used to be. He's clearly on a downward trend, given that he's 30 years old now. I get all that. But there is a way in a price point what actually could make some sense. So I'm not arguing to pay him what he's making now, moving forward, to be clear. It would have to be a declining salary from where he's at currently for the Hawks to want to do it, I think. I do think that his deal for this coming season is actually not bad because it's expiring, and $22 million is a lot of money, but it's not what it used to be. People have not figured this out yet with a new rising cap environment, but he's making less than 16% of the cap this year, which is like what $17 or $18 million was when he signed the deal, etc. It's basically average starter money or even less what he's making right now. And you could argue, and I think I would argue, that last year he played like as an average starter. He's not going to blow anybody away. I get that at this point, but he's still a starting caliber player in the league. At least he was last year. He may not be anymore. I'll be the first to acknowledge that. He is getting older. At some point, it will not be the same, but that's what it is. If, and a big if, an extension happened, I think it would be something like Zach laid out, like a 2-year cheap deal. It's not the same situation, but the most similar comparison I can find in modern vintage is what Boston did with Al Horford, actually, old friend Al Horford. Al signed a 2-year, $20 million total extension with Boston like 18 months ago before his expiring season. Now, Al is older than Clint by a lot, but it was Boston getting out in front of it a little bit, trying to find some value in cheapness in the future. Even if he kind of declines and retires, it was a cheap deal. That kind of equates to the 2 for 24 that Zach asked about. In theory, getting Clint for like 10, 12 million a year and then pairing him with Okongwu would make some sense because Okongwu is on a cheap contract by starting center standards. And the two of them combined would make like what a starting center costs. So that actually does kind of make some logical sense. At the same time, I don't know that the Hawks are like yearning to have those two guys stay together forever and ever and ever. We're already kind of doing that now, but it might make sense if they think Okongwu is going to be the guy long term. Maybe we see Okongwu start this year, for instance, and get better and prove to be can stay healthy, etc. Play 28 minutes a game, 30 minutes a game, and then you kind of have Clint back there to play 18 minutes a game. And I think that in that role, he'd be overqualified for it. Would be good in that role. So, like, to answer the question plainly, there's a pretty good chance that Capela just expires and leaves because there is a chance that like they just need that roster slot and that money for Jalen, etc. But there is a chance that he gets traded in season as well when it comes to either now, between now and October, or even during the season. He's going to be on an expiring contract. It would not shock me if the Hawks traded him in season. Same with Larry Nance, by the way. Would not be just because they're not traded by October, they could be dealt in January, December, February, all the way to the deadline. I'll keep this short and not dive into the cap and tax for 20 minutes, but because of the Jalen factor, the Hawks already like have a lot of money committed in the future when you assume Jalen's gonna be getting a lot of money pretty soon from Atlanta. And letting Capela expire is not a great asset management play, but it might be what they kind of have to do to stay under the tax if they want to do that. So I get it on all fronts. I won't keep going on this, but I think I'll be fairly surprised still if they have Capela, Nance, and Okongwu on the team at the deadline in February. Like, people kind of focused on the next 2 months. I get that, but going forward, I'll be even more surprised if they're all on the team in February, but they could just hold on to Capela if they need to. If they move Nance, that's a factor here as well. So in the end, I think he definitely could just expire. I think an extension could make sense if it's cheap enough. I don't know about Clint's side of things. Maybe he thinks he's going to be a starter long-term somewhere else. I don't know on that front. But if both parties are willing to kind of buy into a long-term partnership, if Clint likes it in Atlanta, it's cool being a backup long-term on a cheaper role like what Al's done in Boston. It's not impossible. I'm not projecting it, but just to answer the question, it's definitely all that stuff's possible. I think still him expiring, him being traded, and him extending none of that would shock me all that much. Last thing on the podcast, question from TA who says, you mentioned the in-season tournament on the podcast. Do you think the Hawks have any chance this year? I was never able to get invested the first time because it was like Atlanta was gone immediately. Good time to kind of do this right now. I have not talked about this at all, really. It's now called the NBA Cup officially. That's a name change that probably should have happened the first time. But the Hawks are in the group with Boston, Cleveland, Chicago, and Washington. It's 5 teams. Obviously, Boston is the favorite there. No surprise, reigning champs. Cleveland's number 2 on the pecking order after winning 48 games last year. Atlanta and Chicago are in that same kind of tier last year being the play-in. And then Washington's the rebuilding team in the group. Group play begins November 12th. That's a little bit later than last year. And they play every Tuesday, 4 weeks in a row against every team in the group. That's a change from last year, too. It's more consistent, I would say. 2 at home, 2 on the road. The last one is December 3rd. And then the top 8 teams go to the knockout round. The 6 group winners plus 2 wild cards. Then it's single elimination from there. Semis and finals in Vegas in the middle of December. To answer the question, do the Hawks have a chance? I think they have a chance. They're not the dregs. I think only the teams that are like truly brutal have no chance. We saw last year that like Indiana and the Lakers were not the best teams in the league, and they made the final of the in-season tournament. So they were pretty good teams. They weren't bad teams, but it's like all you got to do is get hot. It's small sample sizes. It's single eliminations, etc. I think the big question is, can they beat Boston? And they beat them twice last year. We don't know where that game will actually happen, whether it's going to be in Atlanta or Boston. I think Cleveland's beatable by Atlanta. I think Cleveland's going to have a better record than Atlanta, if I had to guess this year, right now. But that's a winnable game. So yeah, it's all small sample size theater. Point differentials come into play. But do they have a chance? I would say yes. And to spoil a little bit of some future content that we'll get into fairly soon, I would say, I think the general consensus on the Hawks right now, nationally, based on like over-unders and early projections and all that kind of stuff, the Hawks seem to be a little bit underrated to me. I think people are projecting more of a drop off losing Murray than I would be, but we'll get into that more later on. But I think the Hawks are going to be friskier than a lot of people expect at this stage, and that could kind of operate through the in-season tournament as well. It is early in the year, chance to kind of surprise a little bit, and it's more of a logical format. Again, it's 4 weeks in a row, same night, and then straight into the playoffs from there, knockout round, etc. And that'll be a lot of fun to get into. Okay, that's all I have on today's podcast. We'll have some more mailbag stuff, I think, either later on this week or in the next week. And keep the questions coming. By the way, if you want to send mailbag questions in, I recommend doing that. You can do it on Twitter at Locked On Hawks, which is the show account. Also, you can send them to me at BT Rowland on Twitter. Also, you can email the show at lockedonhawks@gmail.com. If you want to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Also, if you want to send a question in your 5-star review, I will read those as well. And also, you can send them to me on Patreon, patreon.com/BT Rowland. If you are a member over there, I will be able to get that question directly sent to me. So anyway, that's all I have on today's podcast. Please subscribe to the show. Tell a friend about the podcast. Check us out on Apple and Spotify and Overcast. Also, one more time, if you're watching on YouTube, please like this episode. You have time. Go ahead and do it right now as we're talking. And then subscribe to the podcast from there. Tell a friend, tell someone in your family, etc. I appreciate everybody listening. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you all next time.